Straight ahead on Law&Crime Daily. Lori Vallow Daybell and her husband Chad accused of killing Lori's fourth husband to fulfill the religious prophecy. Did the Doomsday Mom really think she was a goddess who needed to rid the world of zombies? And the Britney Spears conservatorship. The company appointed to assist her finances now asking to resign. And a son taking a stand against his own father, Mark Redwine.
My feelings were that he just wasn't telling us everything. He was hiding something.
The search and murder of 13-year-old Dylan Redwine. Plus, a mother crying out. As a former police officer is sentenced to 3 years in prison for the fatal shooting of Daniel Hambrick.
Mrs. Hambrick lost her son that day, and I am responsible for her loss.
Law&Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law&Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. New details in the so-called Doomsday Couple saga. Police now say Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow Daybell believe Lori's husband, Charles Vallow, had to die for them to fulfill their religious prophecy. Vallow and her husband, Chad Daybell, already face charges in the murders of Vallow's children, 7-year-old J.J. Vallow and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan. They're also accused of killing Chad's first wife, Tammy Daybell. Now, Lori is charged with conspiring to commit first-degree murder in the death of her fourth husband, Charles Vallow, in June 2019. Police initially found Lori's brother, Alex Cox, shot and killed Charles in self-defense. But after further investigation, Chandler police say Lori conspired to kill Charles to fulfill a religious prophecy and clear the way for her marriage to Chad Daybell. This 13-page report says detectives found that Lori Vallow thought she was an exalted goddess, and she and Chad were directed to lead 144,000 people in preparing for the end of the world. They thought they could teleport, call up natural disasters, and pray away demonic spirits. Records showed Charles Vallow threatened to tell Tammy Daybell about Lori's relationship with Chad. Less than 2 weeks later, text messages between Lori and her brother show Lori asked Alex to sleep at her house while Charles was in town. The next day, Charles was dead. Joining us today is former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi and Terry Austin. Gene, a lot of people are going to ask, especially the defense if this goes to trial, but if the case sounds so strong now, why would it take this long to go after Lori?
Well, it's strong now because the prosecution and the police officers and agents dug, and slowly built a circumstantial case by use of text messages, emails, other circumstantial evidence. There's nothing remarkable about that. It just takes time to build a strong case when you don't have any eyewitnesses.
Makes sense. Now, Terry, does this whole alleged ritual sacrifice scream insanity defense from the defense, or what else could they even say?
Well, you know, it would scream insanity, but the Idaho legislature in 1982 decided to repeal Idaho's insanity defense statute, so they can't use that. They can use her mental condition, though, to try to show whether or not she had the mens rea, as you know, the intent to actually commit the crime. But I don't think they're going to be able to use that as a defense either, because that indictment against Lori is rather detailed. It talks about phone calls and text messages and emails between Lori Vallow Daybell and between Alex and between Zulina, who is the wife of Alex. And so I think that there is intent there. And the other thing is, we know that Charles Vallow was shot twice now based on the indictment, once while he was lying flat, or at least that's the allegation. So that shows intent.
Yeah. And Terry, what do you make about the timing? Because right now, Lori Vallow Daybell is found incompetent to stand trial. So how is that going to play into this, these charges?
Well, as you know, they will continue to see whether or not she's competent. She's getting the treatment, and it'll keep getting extended every 90 days or so. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. We'll see how this so-called exalted goddess goes through this competency hearing, or at least process, and see when these cases start. Thank you both. And a new wrinkle in the legal battles for Britney Spears as a company that was going to manage her money alongside her father steps down. The 13-year saga for the Britney Spears conservatorship has taken another turn. More than a week after the singer's emotional courtroom plea, the wealth management firm has asked to leave the arrangement. Bessemer Trust cited the singer's anguished comments to a judge, saying they have now become aware that the conservatee objects to the continuance of her conservatorship and desires to terminate it. The company noted its role had not yet taken effect and hasn't taken any action. This comes after the judge rejected Spears' request to remove her father, Jamie Spears, from her $60 million estate. He's now requesting an evidentiary hearing. Gene, the more I learn about this case, the less I think anyone knows what they're actually doing. How would you unravel this mess if you were involved?
Well, if I were the judge, I would pick a special master to investigate and report back to me as a judge whether Britney Spears does have the wherewithal to make a decision, number one. Number two, whether the father has the experience and the objectivity to run her estate, and whether they need a third party to help both of them from killing each other. So that's what I would do as a judge.
All right, so let me know when you run for judge. I'll make sure to vote in that district, Gene. Thank you. And Terry, does it seem alarming that the co-conservator was brought on to help, was never formally assigned, and is now leaving because they realized their appointment wasn't voluntary? I mean, what does that say about the state of this conservatorship?
You know, what it says is what I've been saying all along, which is we really need to investigate what is going on as far as the conservatorship system is concerned. For there to be no communication between the financial consultant, which is the Bessemer Trust, and Britney and her representatives, they really needed to make sure that there was a firm agreement, that everyone understood this was not voluntary. And so I'm grateful that Bessemer Trust is now seeking to resign because now they know it's not voluntary. But this should have been worked out long before now.
Yeah, this whole conservatorship for Britney Spears seems as simple as my last trip to the DMV. You go one way, it doesn't work, the other way, it doesn't work. But hopefully we'll keep eyes on this saga and someone will straighten this out. I know many people are looking to have Britney Spears freed. Thank you both. Still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, why a son is taking the stand against his father for the murder of his younger brother. Plus, emotions flying high in a Nashville courtroom. The mother begging a judge to reject a plea deal for the police officer who killed her son. Welcome back. Mark Redwine's first wife and oldest son take the stand in his murder trial and tell the jury about statements Redwine made after his youngest son disappeared. Law and Crime's Anjanette Levy is here with their testimony that raised some eyebrows.
Yeah, Brian, Brandon Redwine and his mother really recalled these statements that seemed to fit with the prosecution's theory of this case over the objection of Mark Redwine's attorneys.
I figured Mark knows something. I didn't know what he knew. I didn't know how he knew it.
Brandon Redwine says his father's lack of action and his words made him suspicious when it came to Dylan Redwine's disappearance.
He would talk to me about different possible outcomes, like animal attacks or being shot by hunters, and then he'd always go back to blunt force trauma. And it was just such a distinctively different way of talking any other time.
In fact, Brandon said he never brought up blunt force trauma. And when his father brought it up in 2013, when some of Dylan's remains were found, his voice changed.
With him, it was always blunt force trauma, very direct. And that always, it got my attention on a very big level.
Dylan's skull wasn't found until 2015. A forensic anthropologist said it had blunt force and sharp force injuries that occurred near death. On cross-examination, the defense brought up other ways that Mark Redwine showed concern for Dylan.
Do you remember your dad discussing the pain he felt around thinking about Dylan somewhere crying out for help and him not being able to respond?
He did make those comments.
Brandon Redwine's mother and Mark Redwine's first wife said she became sick to her stomach when she heard Dylan was missing and remembered something Mark Redwine said in the late 80s on a camping trip in the mountains.
He had made a comment that this would be a good place to leave body.
Horvath called the police when she heard Dylan was missing. His remains were found on Middle Mountain 7 months later, the defense questioning the statement's relevance.
So we're talking about a statement over 30 years ago.
Yes, sir.
An FBI cell phone analyst also testified and said that he looked at the records, and Mark Redwine placed a call to Dylan the day after he disappeared, and then the day after that placed another call, but really that was it. There were not other phone calls in which Mark Redwine was really blowing up Dylan's phone, trying to get a hold of him. That same analyst said that based on the location of the cell towers, he wouldn't be able to tell whether Mark Redwine's phone had been at his home or up on Middle Mountain where Dylan's remains were found. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Let's bring back former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi and Terry Austin. Terry, Brandon Redwine seems to be the backbone of the prosecution's theory that Mark's lack of concern is evidence of guilt. The defense cross-examination shake any of that idea at all?
I think the defense did a decent job there. They made some points. Mark expressed some concern during his conversations with Brandon, and I think the defense was able to show that. He said he really was concerned, that he couldn't sleep. He said that he actually wanted to help with the search, but the authorities told him not to do that. They encouraged him to stay home. So they did make some points there. The question is, was that concern genuine? And hopefully the jury will be able to hear some of those calls, because we know that Brandon did record some of that.
It'll be interesting to see whether or not Mark Redwine takes the stand and maybe explains his actions. That may help the defense. Gene, this seems like a well-built prosecution using circumstantial and direct evidence. What do you think the prosecution needs now to get that verdict of guilty?
They need to focus on the strong evidence and not present weak evidence. This comment made to his ex-wife, he was married to her in the 1980s for about 5 years. He made a comment 30 years ago on a vacation trip when he was 29 years old. Stay away from weak evidence. That is weak to me. Focus on the blood and the DNA in the pickup truck, the rug, all over the house. Then also the timeline is important, and don't forget motive. The photos that the son Corey found, and also Dylan. Those are the things that are strong. Focus on that.
Gotcha. And Jeanette, let's go back to the forensic pathologist's testimony. What did she say caused the sharp force injuries to Dylan's skull?
Well, Dr. Diane France testified that it had to be a knife of some sort or a sharp object. So she was really saying that that was caused by something with a bladed edge, although she couldn't say what knife or what kind of knife it would have been. That's important because the prosecution has, or the defense rather, has suggested on several occasions that an animal could have attacked Dylan and hurt him and killed him and then dragged his remains. And obviously she was kind of pouring cold water on that defense theory of the case.
Interesting way in which they kind of cover that over. Thank you everyone for that input. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, breaking down the charges against the Trump Organization and one of his top executives. Plus, the emotionally packed courtroom hearing for a former cop pleading guilty to a fatal shooting. A mother's strong words for her son's killer still ahead. We're back, and we're learning more about the alleged 15-year scheme by the Trump Organization to commit tax fraud. Off-the-books compensation, rent on a Manhattan apartment, lease payments on a Mercedes-Benz, and school tuition. Just some of the accusations against the Trump Organization and his longtime chief financial officer, Allen Weisselberg. According to court records, Weisselberg evaded taxes on $1.7 million of perks that should have been reported. Prosecutors say the company committed a sweeping and audacious scheme to defraud New York City, the state, and the federal government. Weisselberg and the company pled not guilty to the 15-count indictment. Former President Trump released a statement calling the charges a political witch hunt by radical left prosecutors. Michael Cohen, Trump's former personal lawyer, said the charges were just the tip of the iceberg and more are expected to come. Let's bring back former federal prosecutor Gene Rossi and co-host Terry Austin. Terry, with these allegations being about state and federal taxes, is there a chance federal charges could be filed as well?
Well, there is a slight chance. I mean, the indictment did state that Weisselberg and the Trump Organization broke city, state, and federal tax laws. So we could possibly see the DOJ investigating this, or the IRS taking it up as a case against, Trump personally even. But I don't think that that's going to happen. I think there's no desire to really get into that sort of detail. And I think what the federal government is doing is waiting to see what happens in the Manhattan DA's office, waiting to see if, in fact, they can get the claims against Weisselberg and the Trump organization to stick. And if so, then maybe they'll go after them. And maybe, like I said, they might even go after Trump individually as well.
Yeah, this could be the crack in the dam that kind of has the floodgates open up, so to speak. Gene, a wise man once tweeted that the Stormy Daniels deal may be a part of the trial evidence. Can you explain?
Yes, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. I represented Stormy Daniels' former attorney in a matter involving the Southern District of New York, and based on public information, not attorney-client, here's what happened. Michael Cohen took out a loan, $130,000, and went to Stormy Daniels. The Trump organization reimbursed Michael Cohen for that loan to the tune of $400,000, so the net that he would pay after taxes would be $130,000. If the Trump organization deducted that $400,000 as a business expense for legal advice, that's criminal tax fraud. So that could pop up at the trial.
We'll see how that plays out. Definitely seems like this trial could be dark and stormy for the Trump organization. And the legal woes for the former president don't end there. Senior investigative reporter Adam Klasfeld spoke with the lawyer of the whistleblower from Trump's first impeachment about a man who was just sentenced to prison for making death threats.
He was indicted, made the threat in November of 2019, indicted in February of 2020, obviously COVID and all hit, pled guilty, I think, in December of 2020, sentenced in June of 2021. He said something like, I'm gonna bleed you like the pig you are. We all walk among you. We know what you look like. We know who you are. You know, you'll never see us coming. Something like that.
Interesting turn of events. When we come back, the sentencing hearing interrupted by a mother's emotional plea. Why deputies had to pull her away from the defendant in the middle of the courtroom. Next.
Don't harm anyone. Don't come up here.
Chaos in the courtroom. A mother lunging for the defendant, telling a former police officer she can never forgive him for the loss of her son. The mother begged the judge not to accept the plea deal for the former officer, who now admits he was wrong for fatally shooting her son. Nashville police officer Andrew Delke was on duty in July 2018 searching for stolen vehicles when he noticed a white Chevy Impala driving in an erratic pattern. Officers followed the vehicle and attempted to stop it before, they said, the car fled. Daniel Hambrick ran, and Delke can be seen on surveillance video shooting Hambrick multiple times in the back. Delke was scheduled to stand trial, but in a last-minute deal pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter.
I'm pleading guilty today because I recognize that my use of deadly force was not reasonably necessary under all the circumstances. I recognize that what happened on July 26, 2018 was tragic. Mrs. Hambrick lost her son that day, and I am responsible for her loss.
The victim's mother said she only learned of the deal a day before, calling it, quote, racist bias, and implored the judge to reject it so her son could get his day in court. The defendant and the judge were escorted out of the courtroom. After a short pause, they returned, and the judge accepted the plea deal and sentenced Delke to 3 years.
I find you guilty. I find there's a factual basis for the plea, and that the plea is freely and voluntarily given. in case 2019A26 has sentenced you to a term of 3 years as a standard range 1 offender. That sentence is to serve. There will be no petitions for early release.
Gene, 3 years for shooting a man in the back. Was that enough, especially when the victim's family was asking not to have the deal taken?
You know who's the happiest person on the planet right now? Andrew Delke. This is the sweetest of sweetheart deals. He'll only serve about 18 months. I know people who sold a half a gram of crack and got more than Andrew Delke. And here's what bothers me the most. His statement, his allocution to the judge. He didn't say that he had the intent. He was downplaying what he did. I would not have accepted this plea. And it is an outrage what happened in this case.
Yeah, I wasn't really seeing the acceptance of what he did contrasted with the actual penal law. I didn't see that admission there, so I agree with you there, Gene. Terry, your reaction to the powerful words and actions from the victim's Daniel Hambrick's family?
Well, you can understand how his mother felt in that moment in time, learning that, in fact, her son is not going to get any sort of retribution for his murder, and that the defendant is only going to get 3 years. He was originally facing life in prison for first-degree murder, and to plea it down to manslaughter and get 3 years, and as Gene said, he'll be out before that, is really not justice at all. So she is angry, and she is displaying that anger, and the judge actually allowed her to do it for quite some time until it became apparent that she was going to probably attack the defendant and maybe even the judge.
Yeah, and finding out what the plea deal is the day before, why a prosecutor did that, I have no idea. But Gene, Terry, thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.